Right, so this session is much about sort of, we're halfway through, we're reviewing where we are, double checking what else we want to do. So I have taken a quick look at what we've covered and sort of tried to measure it up with people's interest. So I've also added a couple of things to what we're going to do, because it's quite difficult when you're planning something where you can literally have any approach. I find it quite helpful to have this review process. So what we're going to cover today is mid-module review. There is a QR code I'll show people in a minute, but I will also share through the chat a Google form. It literally is what do you like, what don't you like, and what do you want more of type of thing. It's anonymous. We find it really helpful to have it now rather than the end, because we can't do anything about it at the end of the module. But we find it really helpful to kind of see how things are going. I think that we need to talk about observations and case studies, because I think that they're an area we haven't really explored. And then I want to look at your assignment focus. I've been working out how to do this. So when we get to this bit, I think I'll do breakout rooms, 2 breakout rooms, so you can go and have a chat. And then I will invite individuals into the main room so that we can have a one-to-one conversation about your focus. Now, don't worry if you don't have a focus yet, because we can talk about it. We've got more weeks to do it in. But let's just reiterate, we have a revised submission deadline. Okay, now my apologies for the fact that this has been moving around, that a lot of discussions have been going on. I started these discussions about this time last year, and they still hadn't given us the answer by the time the course started. And then they gave us, you can only, you've got to submit it before Christmas. I'm not quite sure what happened. I cannot take any praise for it at all, because I suddenly got an email on Monday saying we can do it this way. So we're doing it this way, and I'm not giving them a chance to back out of it this time. Okay.
Maybe you're scared of you, Claire.
I don't think so.
Or an outbreak of common sense.
Equally, that is less likely to be the case, I would say. But if you want to submit it on the 20th of December, you're very welcome to do so. I think that I think it's about the 15th of December the portal's open. So if you want to submit it early, you're really welcome to do so, but you have until the 3rd of January. So one of the staff members says, oh, you've saved Christmas. And I said, might have saved our Christmas, but might not have saved anybody else's. But at least you've got a bit of space. Mid-module review. Now, you don't need to do it now. Yeah, so the QR code every time we watch a lecture, yeah. So in the chat, I have sent the link to the form. I suggest you kind of save it, but I will also send it out again as part of, as an announcement. Okay, so there. I just didn't want to send it out before our session. So remember, this is what you want us to stop doing, what's not working, what you want us to think about doing, start doing, and what's really working and you'd like to carry on. And I'm particularly interested in the perspective of the distance learners. So we're going to talk about assessment. So you've heard all of this before. I just want to reiterate it and give people a chance to ask questions. So remember, all of the details about the assessment process is in the module guide. I have not updated the submission deadline in the module guide. I've just remembered that I haven't done that. That will be on my to-do list. So you've got a formative task. So this is not marks, but you get feedback. It is an opportunity for you to share your ideas and for me to give you some feedback. Now, the feedback on the whole are suggestions. You don't have to do what I say, although remember that my job is marking and I probably have an idea of what works quite well. But equally, if you feel strongly about something, so long as you provide me with a good academic argument or rationale for it, crack on. Now, we've been doing peer reviewed, so you get an opportunity to share your kind of plan and get some feedback. So I would like to suggest that we have an online session much like this, where you take turns to present it. Now, you do not have to do PowerPoints, you can use notes, you can use whatever, but it's about helping you articulate your ideas. So you'll get some feedback from me, but actually listening to everybody else's might give you an idea, thinking, do you know what, interpretive dance is exactly what I want to use for my research. I never thought about it. I use that obviously as a ridiculous example, but somebody's going to catch me out one day and actually use it very effectively. And then you've got that summative 3,000 word assignment, which is the one that's submitted just after the festive break. Okay, so the formative one needs to be submitted by the 15th of November. Now, remember, this can be note form. This can be bullet points. This does not need to be a fully developed plan, but what I do expect you to have is an idea of what you want, because otherwise I can't give you any feedback, and really think about whether there is a body of academic literature that is that's relevant for your focus. Because let's be honest, we want something interesting, but we want something that will, give you marks. You don't kind of, scupper yourself by insisting on something that's super interesting, but actually there's no real research, because you're just kind of painting yourself into a corner. We're going to do the peer review. Now, the days that I've got selected for that are Tuesday the 19th and the 26th of November. I think that we'll only need one of those. I would like to hold that as, we need to hold it as a synchronous session. So I just want to double check, is this time slot okay for people? Yeah, Helen, you look like you're about to say something. Thank you, Paula.
I was just checking my work diary. That's my
right,
diary.
I see. You had that perplexed look. So let's just have a quick show of hands. Which would work best for you, the 19th or the 26th of November?
Either. Claire, can I just ask, do you mean a similar time to now?
Oh, yeah.
Well, both for me.
It works for you. Excellent.
I think the latter, actually, for me.
I think that, bearing in mind that your submission deadlines are after the festive period, perhaps the latter might be helpful.
I think so. For me, please. Yes. The 26th.
I shall write that down on a post-it note, and then I will see the date on the post-it note thinking, what's that? So I'll write and say what that is.
I'm so sorry. I've got an event booked on the 19th and I absolutely won't be able to join. I'm so sorry.
How about the 20th? We're talking about the 26th of November.
Oh, the 26th is fine. Yeah, 26th is fine.
Okay, so it will be a synchronous session. I will set that up probably tomorrow, invite everybody to it. And it will be an informal, you tell us about your research, you tell us, all of us, and we can make comments. And it's also as much about just seeing what everybody else is doing. I'm really enjoying this one, our summative one. That's not our submission deadline. That is our submission deadline. Okay. So we've got a little bit of space there. Right, just to reiterate the formative assessment. So your formative assessment submitted by through Turnitin. It is a draft for your summative assignment, a plan for a small scale study. It's a plan, you're not doing it, and it needs to be small scale. So, if I make suggestions about focus or bringing back your ideas a bit, it's not because I think your ideas are no good. Absolutely not. It is because I think that you'll do better by scaling it down. Okay, 1,000 words, Turnitin submission. Now the submission will not be anonymous, so that I can give you relevant feedback, and it will not go into the repository. So what you put in your formative assessment will not be checked for plagiarism against any subsequent assignment. Okay. it is, as I say, this you get no grade, but you do get feedback to support your summative assignment. So it's about preparing, it's part of your planning process for your assignment. The peer review we're going to do on the 26th of November. You're going to present your plan to the whole group for discussion and feedback. And the reason why I'm asking you to do this, it helps to clarify your thoughts and ideas. It broadens your experience of educational research, and you can see the perspective of others. So my guess is we've got quite a wide interest group in this group. So I think it'll be a particularly interesting approach. So the summative assignment, so this is the one that needs all of your energy. It's a plan for a small scale study. The clue is in the word plan. You will not be undertaking this research. So although I want you to think of practicalities, you do not have to think, there's no way that, I can get this particular school interested. It's about a plan. Okay, it is 3,000 words. Turnitin submission will be anonymous and it will go to the repository. So you need to take care about self-plagiarism when you get to your dissertation. And my advice is it needs to be informed by the feedback from your formative assignment and your peer review. Sorry, was somebody asking a question? That's okay. Because I'm going to stop now and let people ask a question. So do you want any clarity on the assessment process? Hazel.
So, sorry, my question may have been answered in a former video, and I apologize in advance if so. The plan for the plan,
yes.
Is there a formula? Is there a format that we should follow?
Yes, and that format you will see, or suggested headings, is in the module guide. All the details are in the module guide.
Okay.
Okay, and then what's expected in the summative assignment, which is very similar, obviously, to the plan. Now, when you're doing your plan, the formative one, you don't have to use full academic English. However, if you are feeling a bit wobbly about your academic writing, you could perhaps do a paragraph in your best academic writing and ask for some feedback on that. But most of you have been doing a master's or been doing master's level stuff for a while, so that may not be as relevant for you as ones that are, are doing a full-time one. So it doesn't have to be in full academic English. You can use notes and bullet points. So it could be when you're asked about the context of it, it could be that you look at emotional regulation in adolescence, and then you might, do citations of the key papers. You don't have to necessarily go any deeper than that. Do want a reference list though. Reference list isn't included in your 1,000 words. Okay, so this is an iterative process that is there to help you do that planning. So when you actually get down to do your summative assignment, a lot of the thinking's already been done and you can be confident. I'm pausing just in case anybody else got any questions. If you prefer, you can pop the questions into the chat. So my next bit is talking about observations, because we haven't had any input in observations. So is there anybody in this group that thinks that an observation might be useful for them? Yeah, so I see observations quite closely linked to questionnaires and particularly interviews, and the planning process is often quite similar. And observations are kind of more than just looking, but I am going to read this out. So observation is about simply looking critically, looking openly, looking sometimes knowing what you're looking for, looking for evidence, looking to be persuaded, and looking for information. So you can see that if you're looking critically, so you're not looking in a passive way, you're perhaps comparing and really thinking about, you know, what you're looking at. You know, you want to be open to possibilities as well. And it says, sometimes knowing what we're looking for. So it may be that, well, it's not maybe, but, you know, there's a body of academic literature that indicates that how about male and female presentation of autism, you know, differs. So your observation might be about observing how male and female children with autism interact within a classroom. So you know, so that is informed by the academic literature that suggests that girls and boys present differently and how they socially interact is different. So you can see how that is informed by literature. So you're looking with a purpose within a context, and you actually have to record your observations in some way. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And as I say, I think it's quite closely linked to questioning. So that planning process is quite closely linked to questioning. So what could we observe here? What could be our focus of observation? So I'd like you to pop that in the chat, unless you'd prefer to tell us directly. Okay, I'm going to try a bit of cold calling. So, oh, Angela, how are they? Yeah. So Angela's written how children are using the boxes instead of shoes. Or was that why?
That was Helen, sorry.
Oh, Helen. Oh, sorry, Helen. Yeah, that's the first thing that stands out, doesn't it? Is about the fact that they've got boxes on their feet.
Could it be to do with imaginative play of some kind? It
could be. So if it's about imaginative play, what might you want to observe? What might you want to take note of?
The level of engagement of different children, how they're engaging with us.
Yeah, the type of language that they're using, their body language. You know, and as I say, yeah, this is just an image, but it may be sort of a wider thing, you know. So when we looked at it this afternoon, people were particularly interested by this child here, who they perceived as a female, and they felt that everybody else was focused on this child. And also this child has only got one box, and the box has got circles rather than triangles, because the other boxes have got triangles on it. I never noticed that. So you can see how, you know, your depth of focus can really sort of, you know, be quite deep. So one thing that's to remember is if you're doing observations, they are exhausting because you have to focus really hard.
Some people have two boxes, and some children have two boxes that are very different.
Yeah.
Or one child has, I should say, and another one seems to have two the same.
Yeah. You know, and you know, if you're interested in gender, you might want to particularly, you know, if this child here, I'm assuming you can see my pointer on there, this child here on the left, if that child is a female, you might want to consider how their interactions or actions differ from the other children that appear to be male. You know, you could look at ethnicity. You know, so there's lots of ways of looking at things. And this one, so if we look at this as a perspective of students asking questions, if you were observing something like this, what sort of things might you want to notice?
I'll probably remark on the gender. It seems to be, I mean, I'm guessing just from hand size, but, you know, more male than female hands up.
Yeah. Yes. So again, you know, so I recognise that I'm really fascinated by the difference in gender and how different genders sort of interact. So when I would be writing my methodology, I would need to say, this is what I'm interested in. This is my positionality, part of my paradigm. Okay, so Andrew said, you know, looking at, you know, is there a difference between the way that students respond to questions? What else might you be looking at, Hazel?
I'm looking at the setup of the classroom and why they're all sitting in rows and why he's sitting looking at them. And that's instantly what I'm observing.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. You know, this is what's really important when you're doing research, is recognizing that those will be the things that interest you, that interaction. You know, why is it set up like that? Because the room setup makes a big difference, doesn't it? You know, the teacher sat at the front. This could well not be a teacher at all, obviously. So you might want to look at the position of the teacher, whether they're sitting, they're standing, whether they're moving around the room. You know, it may be, yeah, so if we look at the students, anybody got any other thoughts about how you might be able to look at how students respond to questions if you're observing them? Angela?
Might it be to do with, I'm just thinking we've just got a moment in time here, but the kind of the speed or the rate at which hands are going up correlated to gender, ethnicity.
Thank you for picking that one up, Angela. That came up in the chat. Yeah. And you might want to look at, so my next one is actually about looking, you know, ethnicities and cultural differences. Yeah. And it may not just be about the students, but it may also be, how does the teacher respond to that? Does a male teacher, for example, respond differently to female or male pupils, students? Again, you know, Hazel was picking up, you know, the position within the classroom, you know, whether that indicates a power position. Yeah, I mean, and, you know, there are a myriad of things. So I've got another image, but I think we've kind of talked our way through most of that. This was mainly about kind of looking at, you know, how the teacher might respond to people putting their hands up. You know, what happens with a pupil that doesn't put their hand up? You know, is that the one that the teacher goes for? You know, yeah. And there's more than just observing. You know, you might not be able to you know, this child who is not responding, you may have a perception that they don't understand what's going on, or they can't answer the questions, and that may not be the actual case. So what do you do about it? So, as with most things with education, it's really, really complex. So, observations about studying behaviours within a natural setting, ideally without bias or judgment, but we've already, talking around those images, we're already recognising that we're likely to have some bias, and that may lead to some judgment. So it's really important that we're quite clear about, because we're interpreting this, you've been an interpretivist, so we have to be really clear. So I would be clear about how I'm really interested in the impact of gender on behaviour, for example. You know, if we're looking at something, say, related to autism, I have a very personal perception of autism. So I am unlikely to see negative traits because of, you know, my personal experience. So participant observation. So this is where you are part of the observation. and that you may well interact with what's going on. So this is often seen as being problematic because this sort of, if you've got a positivist and an etic, so you're on the outside, you're on the outside of the fishbowl, actually getting into the fishbowl with the fish would be disrupting the fish. So if you look at there's a video on the Moodle page that refers to that fish analogy. So, you know, some people may feel that actually being a participant observation, so, you know, you're part of it, and teachers do participant observations all of the time, so they're actually quite skilled. So we'll talk about the, you know, the benefits and the disadvantage of it. If I was a positivist, so I believe in ethics, that I'm on the outside of the fishbowl, non-participant observations, there wouldn't be any interaction, and I would be, you know, it says behaviour recorded factually, as if behaviour isn't recorded factually elsewhere. So you can already see that, you know, some people's paradigm shows in, you know, in the wording that they use. So a non-participant observation, you're more likely to be sitting on the outside and you're recording sort of what's going on. You know, and we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages in a minute. Direct observation, so you're a first-hand witness. Field work is data collected from real-life situations, and natural settings are where situations would happen whether you were there or not. And those are quite often, you know, very useful for gathering information. So they're not set up specifically for you. So I would say natural settings often happen in education for observations. So anybody that is involved with, for example, teacher education of various, or any sort of teaching process, particularly of skills, will often be involved in observations. You know, you observe people performing specific skills. And anybody who does that knows how tiring that is. So you need to prepare for your observation. You don't just troll up and say, I'm going to have a look at this. This is interesting. You really need to define what you're going to look at, and that will be informed by the academic literature. So if you don't decide on what you're going to look at, you might become overwhelmed. But equally, you need to be really quite careful that you don't define it too tightly, because then you might miss some very valuable information. You need to carefully plan how you're going to observe and what you want to capture. So those of us that observe teaching, for example, and, you know, perhaps grade it, I don't know about you, but I like to sit right at the back so that the students forget I'm there. It's also really helpful because I can see all the naughty ones at the back, because that's where they sit. So where you place yourself is really important. And it says objective observer. What are our thoughts on an objective observer?
It takes very careful planning to be objective.
Yeah, can you be objective?
Surely by just being there, you are removing a level of objectivity. Yeah,
and also you are likely to be experienced. So you will already have a view of what's going on. Now, if you are a positivist, it doesn't mean that observations aren't helpful, but they may be of less interest to you. So you need to prepare. So you have your charts and your schedules. And I would say whether you're, you know, whether it's a structured, systematic observation or not, you need to perhaps have seating plans, room plans. You need to decide where you're going to sit. You know, are you going to interact? Are you not going to interact? You know, what happens if you're working with children or vulnerable adults and they come and talk to you? You know, what are you going to do? You usually have to talk back because you haven't got an, you know, that's so as with interviews, etc., you can have structured and systematic observation. So you have aims, so you're avoiding inconsistencies between different observers. So remember, your small scale study, it'll be only you. Your dissertation will be only you. So this may not be a key issue, but you may want to have consistency between a range of observations that you do. They identify schedules, frameworks that could be used by any observer. Again, it's like a systematic review. It is designed often for teams of researchers rather than individual researchers. Structured interviews are more likely to be used by a team of interviewers than individual interviewers. So you want to make sure you're looking at the same thing. You record the data systematically and thoroughly, and you can do that through checklists, diaries, charts, critical incidents. I would argue that you're also aiming for something similar in participatory observations. You do want to record data systematically and thoroughly. There's an implication here that actually a more participatory observer may not be systematic or thorough, and there's compromises, but I would argue that there is, and you can adapt your observation chart or whatever from existing ones. So when you are looking at interviews, for example, that could be informed by a conceptual framework. Somebody's already done some thinking and research on that area, and you're using that to inform how you're going to plan your own. So, for example, if anybody has gone through periods of depression and sought support for that, you're often given a questionnaire where you mark yourself against various criteria on a sliding scale. So within a questionnaire, you could say, not necessarily for observations, but if you've got something that is concrete and being used elsewhere, you can use that to inform your observation. So the process is, I would argue, quite similar for observations as it is for planning for interviews and questionnaires. So creating a schedule, you need to be clear about the features that you want to look at, and you need to take that from the literature. You need to, in your methodology, when you get to your dissertation, but also you'll need to do it for this assignment, is actually make the case for why you're looking at what you're looking at. And by making a case, I need the academic literature to support it. And then you choose the most relevant and significant for your aims. So it may be, so what I would also suggest that you do is, when you're reading your literature, to really look at how they find out what they're looking for, and perhaps take note of their observations. But it may be that they do interviews, but it's very closely aligned to what you want to look at, and you want to do observations. You can then say, in the interviews they ask these questions, so these are the things I'm going to take note of. You might want to look at the frequency of something happening. So it maybe you want to see how often children talk to each other, or do something in particular, perhaps engage in a particular area. It may be that you want to look at events at a specific time. So it may be that you are interested at looking at drop-off time at school. You might want to have a look at the observation. You might want to observe the interactions between parents and children. There would be ethical considerations in that, but there's a range of things. So you want to be looking at it at that time. The length of events and kind of the samples that you want to have. So you really need to think about what you're looking at and what type of information is going to be really important for you. And the observation schedule needs to allow you for a representative sample. So, for example, if you had reluctant schoolgoers and you wanted to perhaps look at drop-off time and how the parents interacted at drop-off time and how the children responded to that. If, for example, so you want to look at it drop-off time, there's no point in coming any other time of day because you're not going to gather the information that you want. But it may be that Mondays are a day that this group of children go straight into a nurture group. That might change the data. So you might want to compare the difference. So you need to make sure that what you choose, the time, etc., when you choose to observe something, represents what you want to look at. And the ways that you can do it. Okay, I would like you in the chat to write down the amount of ways you can think of that we could record observations. Excellent. So we've had charts, tick off lists, taking notes, charts with headings already set to guide the observations, recording. Somebody said if it's allowed to happen, and we will talk about the complexity of recording, because anybody that works with children or vulnerable individuals, getting permission to record is really difficult. So we will look at that. So what have we got? Written records, we've got that. Time sampling. So sampling, you may be observing over an hour, but you might only observe every 5 minutes to see what's happening. You might also focus on specific individuals, and your choice of those individuals will be informed by your literature. So, for example, you might be observing communication within the classroom, and I think there's literature around, there is. Children from lower socioeconomic groups have a significantly smaller vocabulary. So you might want to then say, look at social interactions and perhaps look at the vocabulary used, and you might want to choose children on free school meals. You might want to choose children that may have been that have had previous high attainment. So but you don't so you don't necessarily want to look at the whole class because you just can't, because there's too much going on. So you would make an informed by the literature decision on what you're looking at. Event sampling, so it may be that you only want to look at when children are playing on the nature table, for example. Checklists, sociograms are where you have a plan and you sort of draw perhaps the interactions and the movements. Longitudinal studies, so you're looking at specific times over a period of time. With a small scale study, longitudinal perhaps isn't the best way to go. Movement charts, moving around. Media, so that is video and audio. So we're going to, I've got a nice slide for video. Oh, feedback questionnaire on situation B. Oh yes, Paula, that's a really good idea. I keep on forgetting about that. So you're then saying, what was it like to be observed? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so what they have learned from that experience as well. Like if you want to gather more, like what have you learned from that experience in that particular setting? I don't know, whatever it is you're observing.
Yeah, and what I would say is, so I tend to ask people questions because it's not because I'm challenging them, I'm trying to open things out. So yeah, my first question would that be, why would you use a questionnaire? So my assumption is it provides some anonymity. You might not want it provide space for people to perhaps fill it in on their own, then you'd need to think, would they actually do it or not? So could do writing it on Post-it notes or putting a sticker on a part of a board that says, yeah, you're happy or not happy. So, thinking lots of different ways of doing that. So, things like behavior charts is, you've got various types of behavior and you're literally kind of a tally of when they do that. Okay. What might be the disadvantage of something like a behavior chart? What does it tell us?
Is it that the focus is too narrow?
We don't, so we don't know what the behaviors are, do we? We know how often they do them, but we perhaps don't know the intensity of the behavior. So if we take behavior 4, for example, we know that Rose did whatever it was 4 times. So if we take it as hand washing, so she could have been doing quite a lot of stuff and sensibly washed her hands each time. But Ivy, for example, might have only washed the hands once, but used all of the soap and got water all over the place. So you don't have an indication of, details of that actual experience. You know how often they did it. So you might be able to add some information by, taking some notes or reflecting on it. So this is quite a positivistic approach. You're getting numbers out of it, which can be really helpful in some situations. But if the questions that you're interested in might be sort of more of the why rather than the how many, that might not work for you. And this is just another example of something very similar. In fact, I think it's the same data. Is you've got children on the table and you decide on your codes for each of these activities and you mark when the children do it. So this here you've got the order of what they do as much as anything. Gives you a little bit more data. You might be able to make some so we've got these round, Robin, Rose and Harry are all doing activity 3, but these 2 on the other side are not doing activity 3. Is that relevant or not? And you can also do a running record. So you're actually writing down what's happening. From experience, that's really difficult to do, but for some people that might work really well. Angela's nodding. It's difficult, isn't it? I find it really difficult. But what you do have is something that can be analysed in quite a systematic way. But I'm always afraid I'm missing things. So whatever you do, you need to think the processes through. I suggest practice them as well. Have another think. And then just recognise that things like charts, grids and checklists don't take account of the emotional element or that more contextual element that you might need to add as a reflection or notes as you're doing. So you don't have to take, just say a checklist or whatever. You can have notes as well. And also some commentary of significance of what you've recorded. So when I said that, I can't remember, was it Rose and washed her hands lots of times but did it sensibly, but Ivy went over the top with the soap and the water, you might be able to, if you've got a commentary there, you might be able to add that sort of contextual information that will be really important. I think that actually I just really like this image anyway. So I want you to have a think about the advantages and disadvantages of using video observations, and I have just realized how we can do this. I'm going to share a Google Doc. Make sure that everybody can do this. That anyone can edit it. Okay, so in this document, I would like you to, I'm going to insert a table. Advantages video. We can have a look at it. So Angela said ethical approval and consent needed. I suspect that is from somebody who's had experience of seeking those things. Okay, if we could go start looking at the advantages. So I will put this document, I'll tidy my bit of it up and I'll put it onto Moodle for future reference. So there's may eliminate the need for note taking. That's absolutely true. So if you video something, you can get a transcript of the audio of it, and that can be really helpful. Less labour intensive in the moment, but perhaps more so after. So could somebody explain to me why it might be more labour intensive afterwards? I think it would be, by the way, but what makes it labour intensive?
You've got to go through the video moment by moment to annotate every aspect that you might not have been able to do in person, but it allows you sort of to have more than one focus.
Yeah, and it means that you can kind of go back to it. So it does mean what you're creating is very rich data, and you can use software like InVivo allows the analyzing video as well. So yeah, so you'll get a lot of data and focus on one particular participant and aspect whilst you participate. Allows you to do more things than once at the same time. Good if you have a long session that's been observed. Yes, we've already indicated that the focus required for observing is really quite challenging. So we can see it looks like a really good tool for observation. So let's look at the disadvantages. May inhibit spontaneous behaviour. That's absolutely true, and you can get past that by having the recording device available, up and looks as if it's running. So it's surprising how quickly people forget. Ethical approval and consent. Angela, tell us about what makes that particularly tricky.
Well, I mean, just what kind of recording device are you going to use? What's going to happen to the data? You're going to have to get parental consent at a level much higher than you would just to sort of interact as an external adult or professional. It's just really, really complicated.
Yeah, and if you're videoing a whole class, you need to have this consent from every single parent or advocate. Hi, Helen. So we've been looking at the advantages and disadvantages of video recording and observation, and I will share this onto Moodle as well. And Angela's just identified how tricky it is to get ethical approval. And what I would say is, if you're going for your dissertation, probably not a good idea to suggest this, because it's unlikely that you will be able to meet the requirements. So that's one problem. Angela also mentioned something about a device. So you cannot do a recording on your own personal device, particularly if it involves children or vulnerable adults, because you cannot have those sorts of images on your personal device. You also will have problems with GDPR and data safety. So if you ever do something like this, you would need to use an institutional device. So if you, for example, as a Brooks student, you could borrow an iPad, for example. That would mean that everything would then be shared on the Google Drive. And to comply with GDPR requirements, you would need to share, you need to save all of the data, that means videos, etc., on Google Drive, because that covers your GDPR requirements. May miss something if it's focused on something else. So if you've got a video going on one side of the room, something really important might happen on the other side, and you might miss that, but you might hear it. Can be off-putting, especially with children. Oh yeah, they play with the camera. So again, it's about getting them used to it. Sorry, I'm just waiting to see you. Yeah, so levels of engagement. So videos will gather rich and useful data. You just need to be really clear about whether it's worth the quite considerable challenges you can often have around using video recording. Okay, so with all research, there is a balance that you need. There's a compromise that you will be making and a balance that you need to make. So I'm just going to move that across and we'll get back to it. So video observations, on the face of it, seem really helpful, but they do have their challenges. And if you choose to use them, you need to be sure that you're going to get enough, that you'll meet the ethical requirements and it'll give you enough there. So participant observations. So this is where you're part of the observation. And as I've been doing this, so it says loss of researcher objectivity. Now, I would argue that actually it's okay not to be totally objective, because it is unlikely, even if you feel that you're being objective, that you are being objective. So being open about your position, etc., can yield, you can yield quite rich data. And the Braun and Clark 2022, I'm looking like this because it should be, oh no, it's not next to me. Oh yes, it is next to me. So thematic analysis, it's on the reading list. Now what I would say is, even if you're not interested in thematic analysis, it is really quite helpful, because Braun and Clark explore the complexity of a participant researcher and the value that can provide, the insight that provides to your research. So, but what it is difficult to do is actually participate and collect data, because if you're busy doing whatever you're doing, you're not focusing on your data, and you have to focus quite hard on the data. And participation can be difficult for a researcher. So, you're getting that balance. So it may be that if you are a participant observer, it may be that your role is not central to what's going on. It may be that having, you might be there to participate, but you can, you're not perhaps leading the session. So that, again, there's lots of compromises and things that you need to think through. But you're more likely to have more time within that setting, and you have a better understanding of the context there. So you provide a really valuable lens for not only understanding what needs to be observed, but also the analysis. Equally, you need to be really wary of the fact that something that seems commonplace to you might not be commonplace to somebody who is coming into that context. So in phenomenology, which is a great word, I think the best way to describe it is, if you speak to a fish, if you say to a fish, well, how's the water? What's the water like? And the fish says, what water? Because it's their environment. So they don't actually recognize the water's there. And you can quite often be like that if you're observing something, that you do all of the time. You also, so observations need to be recorded at the time or very soon afterwards. So if you're participating, it's really difficult to record it. So you might be able to have a checklist there. You might be able to do something like that, but actually focusing on recording it is really challenging. So, and as you're doing your planning, you'll decide, within kind of half an hour of this, I will make notes. I will then review my notes in 2 days' time, because that reflection time can be also really helpful. So being really clear about that and recognizing that if you're taking part, if you're, for example, leading, water play, and you really want to be looking, oh, that was a really poor choice because it's really difficult to write when you're wet. But, if you're leading a bit of play, you might be part of it, but you might be able to take some notes. So, but you can't really focus on that. So you need to think about that, how you're going to record your observations. You also need to look at the ethical consideration. So this is not about getting ethical approval. This is about how much do you interact. If you're looking at how effective mass manipulatives are, if you then need to decide how much interaction. Do you show them what to do? Do you tell them what to do, or do you leave them to do it? So, and that's, your engagement is really important, but you need to ensure that you're not influencing, for example, children. If you've got a teacher role, you will have a hierarchical role to them. So you really need to think about how that might impact on your observation. You will also need to have the necessary skills and qualifications. If you're participating in something and you're not qualified, there may be a safeguarding issue around that. But also, if you don't have the experience, you can't actually, you can't have an informed view. So about being a participation observer, you're part of the process, and with that comes that contextual knowledge and understanding. So the advantages are valuable data that may not be available using any other approaches, or indeed any other person, because you are a valuable tool. It can be quite helpful in observing change over time. So that would be a longitudinal one. It helps preserve the naturalness of the setting. So there is an argument that actually what you are observing is more valid. Minimizes the disruption of what's going on, because you actually, although you're participating, you don't really want it to be about you. You want it to be about what you're observing. And you have a holistic understanding of what's going on. You've got that contextual understanding, but you need to take care that you don't overlook things just because you're very familiar with them. The disadvantage of a participation observation is it's time consuming. I would argue that any observation is time consuming. There is a potential for bias, but that is not always the worst thing, and you can actually mitigate that to a certain extent by being open about, you know, your potential biases. You do actually need to be really experienced, not only in what you're observing, but actually in observing. You need to consider the ethical concerns. And the last one is personal danger. But in all honesty, that is unlikely to be an issue for us. So, for example, in other areas of work, you actually being in a situation that you want to observe may place you in danger, but that's hardly likely to be an issue. So, ethical considerations when observing children. I would say that for your dissertation, that if you are interested in how children behave, that you gather your data in a child-adjacent way. By that, I mean you could ask teacher their perceptions of things. So, for example, you might be interested in children with autism within, say, reception class. So that they're unlikely to have educational health care plan in place, but that doesn't mean they don't have any needs. You could perhaps observe them, but you could also ask the teacher's perceptions of whether that's happening in their group. You couldn't, well, actually, you wouldn't necessarily ask an autistic child whether they're autistic or not, but you know what I mean. So if you're observing or doing anything with children, the ethical consideration is that you need to perhaps look at an adjacent thing. If you're observing children, you need to have parental or guardian or advocate permissions and consent. So that's informed consent. So that's participation information sheets that are relevant for the individual. And you could well ask the child, so any information you give them, for them to give some form of consent, needs to be worded in a way that they can understand it. And in all honesty, it's often better to do child adjacent things, even if what you're really interested in what the child is doing. Pausing now, just in case anybody's got any questions.
If I've got access to information collected during observations that form part of, for example, data collection or information gathering for an EHCP application, for example, ethically, could we make some kind of use of that?
I don't know. I'd have to have a really good think about it.
Yeah, it probably would depend as well on what the consent forms that have already been signed would say.
So it may be that actually you ask permission to use the actual request, the form that you submit when you're requesting the plan. And you kind of look at it in a documentary way. And you might be interested in comparing that gets accepted and that doesn't get accepted, or the type of funding that's linked to it. Any other questions from people? I've either bored you or I've covered it. I know it's late, so I'll perhaps might be the first one. The other thing that I want to just mention is case studies. Case studies are often really helpful tools of looking at educational situations. And so this comes from the BERA, the British Education Research Association. So they're the people that provide the guidelines for educational research. And just to remind you that there is a new guidelines, 2024, it's on the Moodle page. So this is from Hamilton 2011. Case study is often seen as a means of gathering together data and giving coherence and limit to what is being sought. And for me, I think the really key things is that coherence and limit. Fits in perfectly for a small scale plan or small scale study, and probably fits quite well in a dissertation. So you are unlikely to be looking at gathering a lot of data that can be generalized, but what you will be doing is looking at a lot of data around a very specific context that can inform similar contexts. So a case study, do you think it's more likely to be attractive to a positivist or an interpretivist? Angela?
Interpretivist?
Absolutely. It is unlikely to be of interest to a positivist, because a positivist would say, one case study. You can't generalize it. So the type of questions they're likely to be interested in are unlikely to be make this an attractive approach. So case studies develop a rich picture using different data collection approaches. Okay, so now what quite often happens is there is a compulsion to, I need to triangulate my data. Now, in qualitative work, that isn't necessarily important. There's often a perception that you need to do 3 different things. So you need to do questionnaires, interviews, and an observation, because that's how you triangulate. Now, in interpretivist, which is likely to be of interest to educationists, what you're doing is seeking to validate your results. So you're seeking a range of data that can help you understand, but also to analyze and to say to your reader, look, this is likely to be true because I've got similar data over here. Okay, so a case study is about a picture of a very specific context, using a range of data points, a range of, collecting data in various ways. And so you're gathering views, perceptions, experiences, and ideas, okay? So you can perhaps use, so if you are looking at behavioral policy within an institution, so you might do a documentary analysis of the policy. So it may be, content analysis of the policy. You might want to look at the rate of detentions and exclusions. You might want to look at that in relation to an ECHP plan or identified vulnerable students. You might want to look at it against free school meals. But equally and validly is you might want teachers' perceptions, or you might want to observe behaviour management. So you can see within a case study, you can gather a lot of information around, a specific context that has the potential to inform similar context. So it may be you're looking at behaviour policy within a primary school in the southeast, a small village primary school in the southeast. That might be relevant. I was going to say Wales, but they have a different curriculum. But if it's in the southeast, it may be kind of northeast. Would it inform behaviour policy in a large urban primary school? Possibly not, but you would need to look at the features. So you're not looking for generalizability, you're looking for depth of understanding. And you can do a single case, or you can do multiple cases. So for example, I've just marked a dissertation where they are looking at absenteeism across 2 Oxfordshire primary schools within the same multi-academy trust. One has a high level of free school meals and a high level of absence. Yeah, by high level, I mean above average absences. The other primary school has fewer percentage of students with free school meals and a much higher than average attendance pattern. So you can see that those case studies are really, you can compare the two, so they work really well together. So case studies provide in-depth insights into a particular context. You can gather a multiple of perspectives and use a range of data, and this helps with the validity of the findings. So we're not looking at triangulation, we're just looking to gather as much information to help us come to an understanding of what's going on there. Questions about case studies? I will obviously put these slides onto Moodle.
Can I ask around about ethics and sort of guidelines around case studies? I mean, how do they compare to, for example, observations? Are they looser, tighter?
When you're seeking ethical approval, the biggest red flag is direct interaction with children. So a case study could have a range of data from multiple perspectives that may not include children. So I'm just saying, that is the thing that is likely to be picked up, and you're more likely to be advised to perhaps ask, say, teachers' perceptions of what's going on. That doesn't mean that children's views and voice aren't important. It just means that for a dissertation, it may be worth thinking of another way. And also remember, if you are looking at, if you want student voice or, student voice, for example, there's lots of ways of getting that without actually asking them. You can use, say, visual learning journeys where they draw their learning journeys and they, or you could ask them to do a collage and describe that. So there's lots of ways of doing it. But what I would say is if you're looking for ethical approval for a, for your dissertation, the thing that we'll get a close looking at is any interactions with children or vulnerable adults. But an argument that I would make, for example, is if you're an experienced practitioner in that area,
Bread and butter.
Yes, exactly. And this is a sense of frustration within the education team. We went through a period of where any empirical work was discouraged. But so I need to remember to think very carefully about your academic, your supervisor. So when you go for when we get to the dissertation stage, and we will have another online thing fairly soon about that. When we get to the dissertation stage, you will be asked to fill in a Google form that indicates what you want to do it on and the type of method. And there is also a question, is there any other information? So for you, Angela, it may be worth indicating the type of area you want to work in and your experience. So I remember to choose somebody who is used to working and looking at ethical approval. So when you look for ethical approval in your dissertation, it's your supervisor that makes the final decision, but your supervisor has a body that they discuss it. And if there's anything that's contentious, then we'll take it to a wider body. So get in there. Right, so now we've got to the one-to-one feedback and peer discussions. So we are a large group, I would like to give you a space that doesn't include me, because I think you might discuss things more effectively if I'm not here. We've only got 4 people, so I would like to check, are you happy to go into a breakout room of 4 people to have a chat? Okay, what I would suggest is then I will call people in so I can broadcast in there, so that you come back into the main room to talk about your assignments specifically. Is there anybody who needs to kind of get on, and we could have that discussion first?
Could I'm sorry that I will need to leave at past.
Okay, we'll have you first then, Hazel.
But maybe there's somebody else as well. I don't want to.
If people are, so I'm going to create one.
Sorry, Claire, could I go after Hazel? Because I've still got marking to do before tomorrow.
Oh, God. That is the cry of an educationalist.
Oh, Helen, where are you? Are you not on half term, or do you not have a break this week?
No, I work for Oxford Brookes, so
yeah. Sadly,
no
we do not have a half term.
No half term.
No half term.
Right. So what I will do is I will create the breakout room. Hazel, you might be pushed in there, but if you are, just come back to the main room, and then I'll broadcast for Helen when we're ready, and then we'll kind of go through it. Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm opening all the rooms. Oh, excellent. I was just writing you a message. Okay. You're on mute.
I was just going to say thank you. That was extremely helpful to have that rapid overview. I am coming to you with, I have to admit, very little, Claire.
That is absolutely fine.
But already just there's a shape appearing. My big question to you is something that I'm not totally understanding, and that is the difference between, how do I formulate this question? Basically, this plan for this small scale study is not the plan for a dissertation. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely not the plan for the dissertation.
Why? Why is that?
I'm going to stop recording now. Mainly because